Today we're continuing in our series looking at the book of Daniel, and we're going to be in chapter 2 if you want to be finding that. And I've left up Matt's original slide of indecision in terms of what the sort of tagline is for this. But effectively it's, what are we doing between the Sundays? What are we doing with our 90% that we're not spending in a church meeting? So we're going to look to apply what God has to say to us from Daniel chapter 2. And then we're going to read out the whole passage, which, as Amanda has said to me this morning, her PB on this chapter readout is 8 minutes 51. So you can time that and see if that's going to be a new PB for us. She's got a personal best for all the chapters of the Bible. Then I'm going to hopefully apply some context and then some application from that. So, Amanda, would you like to read this out?
Okay. Right, so strap in, 49 verses in 8 minutes, 51 seconds. Okay, so can I go? Go. In the second year of his reign, Nebuchadnezzar had dreams. His mind was troubled and he could not sleep. So the king summoned the magicians, enchanters, sorcerers, and astrologers to tell him what he had dreamed. When they came in and stood before the king, he said to them, "I've had a dream that troubles me, and I want to know what it means." Then the astrologers answered the king, "May the king live forever. Tell your servants the dream, and we will interpret it." The king replied to the astrologers, "This is what I have firmly decided. If you do not tell me what my dream was and interpreted, I will have you cut into pieces and your houses turned into piles of rubble. But if you tell me the dream and explain it, you will receive from me gifts and rewards and great honor. So tell me the dream and interpret it for me." And once more they replied, "Let the king tell the servants the dream and we will interpret it." And the king answered, "Now I'm certain you are trying to gain time because you realize that this is what I have firmly decided. So if you do not tell me the dream, there's only one penalty for you. You have conspired to tell me misleading and wicked things, hoping the situation will change. So then tell me the dream, and I will know that you can interpret it for me." So the astrologers answered the king, "There's no one on earth who can do what the king asks. No king, however great and mighty, has ever asked such a thing of any magician or enchanter or astrologer. What the king asks is too difficult. No one can reveal it to the king except the gods, and they don't dwell among humans." And this made the king so angry and furious that he ordered the execution of all the wise men of Babylon. So the decree was issued to put the wise men to death, and men were sent to look for Daniel and his friends to put them to death. So when Arioch, the commander of the king's guard, had gone out to put to death the wise men of Babylon, Daniel spoke to him with wisdom and tact. And he asked the king's officer, "Why did the king issue such a harsh decree?" Arioch then explained the matter to Daniel. At this, Daniel went into the king and asked for time so that he might interpret the dream for him. Then Daniel returned to his house and explained the matter to his friends Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. He urged them to plead for mercy from the God of heaven concerning this mystery, so that he and his friends might not be executed with the rest of the wise men of Babylon. During the night, the mystery was revealed to Daniel in a vision. Then Daniel praised the God of heaven and said, "Praise be to the name of God forever and ever. Wisdom and power are his. He changes times and seasons. He deposes kings and raises up others. He gives wisdom to the wise and knowledge to the discerning. He reveals deep and hidden things. He knows what lies in darkness, and light dwells with him. I thank and praise you, God of my ancestors. You have given me wisdom and power. You have made known to me what we asked of you. You have made known to us the dream of the king." Then he went to Arioch, whom the king had appointed to execute the wise men of Babylon, and he said to him, "Don't execute the wise men of Babylon. Take me to the king, and I will interpret his dream for him." Arioch took Daniel to the king at once and said, I found a man among the exiles from Judah who can tell the king what his dream means. The king asked Daniel, also called Belteshazzar, are you able to tell me what I saw in my dreams and interpret it? Daniel replied, no wise man, enchanter, magician, or diviner can explain to the king the mystery he has asked about. But there's a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. He has shown King Nebuchadnezzar what will happen in days to come. Your dream and the visions that passed through your mind as you were lying in bed are these. As your majesty was lying there, your mind turned to things to come, and the revealer of mysteries showed you what is going to happen. As for me, this mystery has been revealed to me not because I've greater wisdom than anyone else alive, but so that your majesty may know the interpretation and that you may understand what went through your mind. Your majesty looked, and there before you stood a large statue, an enormous, dazzling statue, awesome in appearance. The head of the statue was made of pure gold, its chest and arms of silver, its belly and thighs of bronze, its legs of iron, its feet partly of iron and partly of baked clay. While you were watching, a rock was cut out, but not by human hands. It struck the statue on its feet of iron and clay and smashed them. Then the iron, the clay, the bronze, the silver, and the gold were all broken to pieces and became like chaff on a threshing floor in the summer. The wind swept them away without leaving a trace. But the rock that struck the statue became a huge mountain and filled the whole earth. This was the dream, and now we will interpret it to the king. Your Majesty, you are the King of Kings. The God of heaven has given you dominion and power and might and glory. In your hands he has placed all mankind and the beasts of the field and the birds in the sky. Wherever they live, he has made you ruler over them all. You are that head of gold. After you, another kingdom will arise, inferior to yours. Next, a third kingdom, one of bronze, will rule over the whole earth. Finally, there will be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, for iron breaks and smashes everything, and as iron breaks things to pieces, so it will crush and break all the others. Just as you saw that the feet and toes were partly of baked clay and partly of iron, so this will be a divided kingdom. Yet it will have some of the strength of iron in it, even as you saw iron mixed with clay. As the toes were partly iron and partly clay, so this kingdom will be partly strong and partly brittle. And just as you saw the iron mixed with baked clay, so the people will be a mixture and will not remain united any more than iron mixes with clay. In the time of those kings, the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that will never be destroyed, nor it will be left to another people. It'll crush all those kingdoms and bring them all to an end, but it will itself endure forever. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock cut out of a mountain, but not by human hands. A rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. The great God has shown the king what will take place in the future. The dream is true, and its interpretation is trustworthy. Then King Nebuchadnezzar fell prostrate before Daniel and paid him honor and ordered that an offering and incense be presented to him. The king said to Daniel, surely your God is the God of gods and the Lord of kings and a revealer of mysteries, for you were able to reveal this mystery. Then the king placed Daniel in a high position and lavished many gifts on him. He made him ruler over the entire province of Babylon and placed him in charge of all its wise men. Moreover, at Daniel's request, the king appointed Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, administrators over the province of Babylon, while Daniel himself remained at the royal court. 8 minutes 30.
A new PB, yes, well done. Can we give a round of applause to Amanda? Thank you. Thank you for that. I appreciate it's a long section of scripture, but it's a self-contained story, and it's necessary sometimes to read these things out in their entirety. So chapter 1 ends with Daniel and his friends' faithfulness being rewarded. They drew a line and they said, no further than this. And that, I suppose that relatively small line was drawn, and God rewarded their faithfulness. And it says that the king found them 10 times better than all the magicians and enchanters that were in his kingdom. So far, so good for Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. But then we get to chapter 2, and the king has a problem. And as with all ancient kings, if the king has a problem, then very soon you'll find that everyone else also now has a problem. Because the king has had a dream, and clearly it's been one of significance for him because it's got him rocked. The king is frightened, really. And I love this comment from Dale Ralph Davis. He says, how easy it is to terrify strong men outside of Christ. I just love that quote. The king calls together all of the best, or the translation Amanda was reading, wise men. It says Chaldeans in other places, but effectively it's the whole religio-scientific community that he has at his disposal. We know that when he conquers lands, he takes the best of the best and brings them to his court. He has the cream of the crop, the best interpreters of dreams that he has. But this dream interpretation shouldn't actually be a problem for the Chaldeans or for the sorcerers or the magicians, because this is their bread and butter, actually. This is what they do. They interpret dreams. This is a stone tablet taken from actually quite a few centuries before Daniel, and it's a translation, effectively, or an interpretation tablet of dreams. So it will say things like, if you look to the left, then you will surely know defeat. Or if you look to the right in your dream, then it means that you will have victory. There's lots of line items here that say, if he does this, then it means this. So it's not actually a hard thing for them to interpret the dream, except that, in this story, Nebuchadnezzar raises the stakes. See, they not only have to tell him what the dream means, but they have to tell him what the dream was in the first place. And he's not told them what that dream was. Now, we're not sure why he does that. Maybe he's so rocked by this dream that it's made him paranoid, that he's worried about sort of powers within his court. Perhaps he wants to just test the validity of the wise men in his court. How good are they? Or maybe it's just a tyrant king doing tyrant king things. When an ancient king says jump, his court is expected to say how high. And this causes this religio-scientific community some consternation. See, the king's problem now is their problem. They have to guess, really, what his dream was. And we get this wonderful line in verse 11. What the king is asking is so difficult that no one can make it known to him except the gods, whose dwelling is not with mortals. See, even 6th century BC occultic specialists knew what the king was asking is nuts. You cannot tell me that I have to tell you what you dreamt and then interpret it. This is a bizarre and bonkers claim, and you can see almost their indignation, probably a great deal of fear as well. The indignation kind of comes out of the scripture as you read it. It's impossible, they say. And I think all of this just highlights the overarching theology of the chapter, and it is God is in control, and he is the only one in control. And I kind of was tempted to write in pencil next to chapter 11 that verse 11, God would say to verse 11, what you're asking is impossible. And God would say, challenge accepted. See, the mithering of the Chaldeans and the sorcerers causes the king to lose patience, and he raises the stakes once more. Tell me what I dreamt, tell me what it means, or you will become body parts. See, the court of Babylon was a rich, decadent, and can be relatively cushy place for those of Nebuchadnezzar's court. But it's also a totally brutal environment. So when the king says that he would tear you limb from limb, you can guarantee he's probably going to follow up on that, and that your death is not going to be quick and painless. See, Daniel now is caught up in this because he is one of these courtiers, as are his friends, and he's caught up in this, what I call a grisly cabinet reshuffle. This is an incredibly high-pressure situation. The king's root and branches reform of his court is going to include Daniel and his 3 friends. And I think when you read through this chapter, you can be forgiven for thinking how casual it all comes across. The backdrop is presented really casually, and it almost describes that Daniel's got his hands in his pockets, and he's walking from, oh, hello, it's the chief executioner, and then he walks back to his friends, and then he walks back to the chief executioner, and then to the king. But just imagine the emotions, that gut-wrenching feel that both Daniel and his friends would have had as the king, who, as we know from biblical accounts, but also extra-biblical accounts, is a ruthless tyrant. He will put you to death. He'll put you to death and your family to death in quite gruesomely inventive ways. The king wants you to tell him what he saw in a dream and then give the interpretation as well. Otherwise, it's death and destruction for you, your friends, and your family. So what's Daniel's response? Well, in verse 17 and 18, he goes to the only one who can help, the only one who can deliver on the impossible. He goes to seek God's help via a prayer meeting, effectively. And when you read it, I get the impression that this prayer meeting wasn't just a kind of one-off thing. This was this seemed to be like a regular thing. So Daniel would go and talk about the trials and tribulations of what happened at work, and also his friends. But again, it's super casual, the way it's sort of presented. It's like, okay, Daniel, what's the agenda for the prayer meeting today? Well, we've been growing a bit, so it'd be always good to ask for a church building. And we've got an outreach event coming up. And item 3, I'm quite keen to keep all my limbs where they should be. So should we start with item 3? Yeah, I think we should start with item 3. And they pray. And again, this is really casual. It says God gives them the answer. It doesn't actually tell you what he's feeling about it right now, other than he urges them to pray. But it says in verse 19 that God reveals the mystery. And then we get to what I think is the apex of the chapter, where the author actually slows us down. Everything else has been quite, not staccato, but it's been quite sort of run-of-the-mill, a description of what's happened. One verse after the other is just sort of going through the motions of what's happened. But then we get to verses 20 to 23, and Daniel is responding in praise and worship of God. And it seems to be this is where he draws his strength from. This is where he draws his certainty from. He declares that God's got all wisdom and might belong to him. He is in control of all times, all seasons, kings and empires. He gives wisdom and understanding. He reveals hidden things, and he gives gifts to those who call on his name. See, Daniel knew from before chapter 1, but then we get chapter 1, where he's trusted in the small, and now it's a much larger thing, that God is in control. And that is the wellspring on which he draws from. So God is in control, and Daniel goes before the king and explains the dream that Nebuchadnezzar, though strong and powerful, will pass away. And there'll be other kingdoms that will come, all slightly less glorious and more divided, and that they will also pass away, until lastly there's going to be a 5th kingdom that God will set up. A kingdom that starts from small beginnings, but is the ultimate and final kingdom. It may be a slight stretch, but I find it really interesting that the 5th kingdom that does away with all the rest, that is the everlasting kingdom, starts as something that's external to that structure. You have this great statue representing all these kingdoms, but you've got something that is external to that, something that is not made of man. And the fact that it's a small stone that smashes that statue to bits, I also find quite interesting. Again, could be a stretch, but I like to think that might be a stone, perhaps a stone that the builders have rejected, that becomes a cornerstone for what is an everlasting kingdom. The king is more than impressed. And in a parallel to Joseph and Pharaoh, he rewards Daniel. He promotes him within his courts. The execution of the courtiers is called off, and Daniel's friends are promoted. And everything is great until chapter 3. But that is a sermon for another time. So what do we do in response to this story? How do we see what's gone on here and apply it to ourselves? Now, unfortunately, there's a few of us that can relate to that pressure that Daniel had. But many of us Many of us can't relate to that level of pressure of responding to a king, to the whims of a tyrant, or have your arms and legs ripped from you. But we can relate to a lot of the elements within this story, those gut-wrenching moments where you feel helpless or where you feel out of control. A helpless situation, a difficult problem that needs intervention. Uncertain times, perhaps a fickle boss or a fickle teacher, or someone making demands of you, where they hold sway over what happens to you. Perhaps there's uncertainty like political turmoil, a general election or a presidential election campaign, perhaps. I think we can relate to lots of things where there's that gut-wrenching uncertainty, and I think there's a couple of things that we can learn from and apply to our lives. And I've got 3 points, and as is the preachers want, they're alliterative. They all start with R. So there's 3 R's that I think we can learn from Daniel. The first is that Daniel rested or reveled in who God was and his supremacy. His confidence came from knowing where the source of all knowledge, all wisdom, and all power comes from. So we see that he trusted God in the small. He trusted him in chapter 1 with what is now a relatively small thing compared to this. And God rewarded him. But also he was rewarded in seeing the faithfulness of his God. And that's where you can see, as I said, verses 20 to 23 show that this is the wellspring that he draws on. Actually, how he felt about the situation doesn't come into it. It doesn't really mention that. But the truth of who God is proclaimed by Daniel. And I think whatever situation we're going to face, we must be rooted in that same truth. He is the same God, the God of Daniel, the God of impossible rescues. This is an individual impossible rescue of Daniel and his friends. But it's also representing the impossible rescue that God will do to Israel as they're completely defeated. They're exiled to Babylon. It seems like a hopeless situation. But then we see in the book of Nehemiah, there's this wonderful restoration of the remnant. But then there's also an impossible rescue on a cosmic level when we see that through the work of Jesus, our impossible rescue, we talked about it this morning in the worship, it's not that we got pulled out of a pit of uncertain things, it's we got pulled out of a pit of our own destination. The fact that we couldn't make a way to be right with God, but God made a way that we could be right with him. The God who came to earth to save us in the form of Jesus, this was the ultimate impossible rescue, that we could be made righteous before him because of what Jesus has done. This is the God of impossible rescues. This is Daniel's impossible rescuing God, and he is our unchanging God. So I think if we're to tackle the fleeting pressures of this world, and I think they're not going to feel fleeting at the time, but they are in the context of eternity, we have to have Daniel's perspective. We have to be rooted and we have to revel and rest in who God is and the absolute certainty that he is sovereign. The second R that we come to is that Daniel revealed the truth. He revealed the kingdom. This chapter alone has, one of the commentaries sort of put it, over 30 times in which a revelation verb is used. So words like reveal, show, declare, make known, tell, to know. All of these things are in this over 30 times within this one chapter. And Daniel uses the gifts that God has given him to reveal both God's power and his truth. God's power is revealed in that Daniel uses his gifts of interpretation and prophecy to reveal what was impossible, to tell the king his own dream and its interpretation. But he also reveals the truth of who God is. In verse 27, it says this: "No wise man, medium, diviner, priest, or astrologer is able to make known to the king the mystery he is asked about. But there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries." How many times have we got that situation where the structures that we have trusted in, the modern Babylon sort of structures that we have, that we rest on, I don't know, political allegiances or financial systems or just the way things are operating, and we say that actually they fall short, but we can say, but there is a God in heaven who reveals mysteries. Daniel also reveals the truth of the kingdom that is to come, this fifth kingdom, this work of Christ, that is, for Daniel was not yet, but for us is both now and not yet. That first stone that came, the cornerstone that struck down this system, that started the revolution of what this fifth kingdom would be, Daniel revealed the truth of it. This is a kingdom that had a humble beginning, but it will not pass away. And one day it will be the only kingdom left standing, one that is supernatural, one that doesn't rule through fear or brutality, and it's not ruled at the whims of a fickle or vain king or emperor, but it's an eternal, loving king that is unchanging, consistent, and relentless in his love for his children. And this is a kingdom that, if you put your faith in Christ, we get to call home. See, we live in the tension of this now and not yet kingdom. We have the joy of revealing the kingdom, though, to those around us. See, God is sovereign in all places and over all things. Our task is to reveal and make that known. Tell of the kingdom, tell of the good news that's available through Jesus. We don't need to bring the kingdom, we need to reveal it. We don't bring the kingdom, but we do bring the authority that God has given us through Christ. We can reveal its power and its truth to bless people. An example of this I'm minded of when I was sort of preparing this is my wife Jenny, who teaches Pilates. She would pray for all of her clients. And she would pray before her classes and pray for the individuals within her clients. And this was actually a place that became known by people who hadn't gone to church, but her classes were known as places of sort of safety and family feeling. And this was Jenny revealing the kingdom. She'd also get words of knowledge for her clients, and with timing and tact and wisdom, she would choose when to reveal that. But she was able to reveal the kingdom to people, that there was a king who was unchanging, who was steadfast, and who loved them and had a kingdom available to them. She'd also pray for opportunities before school run. She'd say, Lord, who do you want me to meet with? Who do you want me to talk to? And she has some amazing stories of when God has just faithfully responded to that prayer. And she's met someone just at the right time, just in the right moment, in order to be able to share God's love with them. I'm also reminded of a senior figure in my organization who's introducing themselves to quite a large crowd. And he was introducing sort of what was important to him. And actually, front and center of that, he put his faith. He actually quoted Jesus and said how Jesus' truth outworked through him would be a blessing to the company and blessing to those who were around him. He was revealing the truth of who Jesus was, what this kingdom would mean, and that people could be a part of this. These are just a few good examples of how we can reveal the kingdom to people, but there's no prescribed way. Only I would say this, God's kingdom rule is everywhere. We just have to look and ask for opportunities to reveal it. How can you use the gifts that you have to reveal his kingdom? The response to it, though, I should point out, isn't on us. You reveal the kingdom. But Nebuchadnezzar, he was struck by this, but he didn't actually have a long-lasting response to and commitment to Yahweh as a result, as, again, we'll see in chapter 3. So our responsibility is to reveal the kingdom where and when we can, but it is not our responsibility for the person's response to that. So we're to rest in God's authority and reveal his kingdom. The third R, I think, was a reality for Daniel, but perhaps it's more of an instruction for us, and it's this: raise our expectations. I think Daniel had raised expectations of what God would do, again, based on his experience prior to chapter 1, but also chapter 1. His experience of what God could do and would do was raised. And I think he also anticipated that his prayer for God's mercy in chapter 2 would be answered. Now, I think most of us are confident in God's unchanging nature, and I think we all know that his kingdom rule is good, and I know that we're all confident that his sovereign rule is everywhere. But I think if we're honest with ourselves, we're less confident that he is able to operate with absolute sovereignty to the same extent Monday to Saturday as he is on a Sunday, or perhaps a Wednesday night. I know that for me, my confidence I'm preaching to myself here. I know my confidence in his sovereign rule Monday to Saturday is not the same as it is on a Sunday morning. What are your impossible situations? What are the uncertainties that people are facing in your workplace, in your streets, on your school run or university? Are these opportunities for a revealing of God's power, a revealing of his truth, of his sovereign rule? I mean, just in preparation for this, but also prior to this, there's been lots of miraculous answers to prayer in my work situation. And this is despite the fact that my expectations of God's sovereign rule Monday to Saturday is less than my Sunday mornings. So please know, as I said, I'm preaching to myself here as well. Now, in terms of raising your expectations, I'm not asking you to go from sort of 0 to sort of full-blown acts. But just think about, what is your expectation now for what God can do in your Monday to Saturday? Just have a think. What is your expectation that he can do? Now raise it. Just raise it that little bit. Raise that expectation of what he can do. Because I think we have an amazing opportunity to faithfully serve in the current fading kingdom, and that's what it is. We're in a new Babylon. It is a fading kingdom of earthly powers, while we wait for the full revelation of the eternal final kingdom, that fifth kingdom. So what are the gifts that God's given you? And are they reserved for Sunday or life group? Can they be put to use in the rest of your week in revealing the truth of God's power and Jesus' relentless love for us? So I think we should rest. I think we should revel in God's sovereignty over all things. We should reveal his kingdom wherever we can, but we should also raise our expectations. What are the circumstances in which the people of our Babylon would echo the Chaldeans and the sorcerers and say, what's being asked here is impossible? Is this an opportunity for us to say, on behalf of the King of Kings, challenge accepted, like God would do to verse 11? So let us raise our expectations, reveal who God is, and then revel in who he is, because he is sovereign over all things, over all places, and at all times. Amen.